Necessity may be the mother of invention most of the time, but to these three visionaries, it's all about exploration, saving lives, and the quest for creative expression. Step up to meet the extreme inventors, the ultimate toy maker, a genius composer, and the creator of a shark-stopping device.
Whatever happened to the future we envision? Why don't I have a rocket car just like George Jetson? Rocket guy, high above the earth. Rocket guy, he's our captain. Rocket guy.
Who on earth would ever have thought that inventing a simple toy could have made this guy from Bend, Oregon, a fortune big enough to fund his own personal rocket? Well, that's Brian Walker, the rocket guy. In 2004, at the cost of $1 million, he aims to blast off for the stars on his first test run. And if all goes well, at 15,000 feet, he'll press the eject button and parachute back to Mother Earth. Is it dangerous? Well, yeah, but he's the rocket guy.
I've been inventing as long as I can remember because of that independent scientist/inventor type lifestyle. And I just kind of really like that idea. Plenty of times resigned to the fact that I wasn't going to make it and gave up and went out and got a real job. But I was never satisfied. It just wasn't me. And so there was something internally driving me and pushing me on.
Maybe Brian read too many popular mechanics mags as a kid. Now at 46, he's a young at heart, never say die inventor, a garage tinkerer, the sort of guy the neighbors ask, so, what exactly is it for? This is the overblown schoolboy's fantasy that will allow our Brian to boldly go, well, to boldly go up. That's the plan. Will it work? Well, hopefully a tad better than a few of his earlier star inventions.
I decided to take a hard hat and add a fan to it so it would circulate air. And then to power the fan, I'd put solar cells on it so it was powered by the sun. So when you wore the hat, you'd put it on and the air would be circulating around the inside, and it gave you, it was a little bit cooler, but the psychological advantage of feeling the air also had quite an effect too. It wasn't like an air-conditioned hard hat, but it did keep the air moving, so.
But Brian's cool headgear wasn't exactly the fastest moving product on Walmart's shelves. Back to the drawing board. This time, Brian figured what the world needed was a personal hovercraft with a front-mounted gun.
I wanted to set up a little indoor recreational area where people would float around on hovercraft and they'd have lasers on them and they could shoot each other and score points, kind of like a life-size pinball game. Last I heard several years ago was the prototype and the tooling ended up in the LA County landfill.
Next, a collapsible stretcher for the military, but the project collapsed faster than the stretcher did. And then there was this nifty little submarine for a Fiji resort, but the idea sank without a trace.
It was a miracle I even produced the first sub, but it had lots and lots of problems. And unfortunately, after a lot of time and effort, it just wasn't something that was going to happen. And like so many other things, it just went away. So, you know, as time moved on, I think a lot of people, a lot of friends and family began kind of looking at me and tipping their head about, you know, because between the ages of 20 and 35, I had 6 major failures to the point where I had to move back in with my folks, get my feet back on the ground.
20 years of effort, obsession, and disaster. One short, messy marriage. No kids or happy ever after here. But you can't hold a good inventor down for long. And finally, it looked like Brian's stars were beginning to line up.
The inspiration for this product actually came from aircraft instruments that use gyroscopes. Some of them use air. Laser light, this was kind of a line of products. The laser light line was like this was the first toy I sold. And this is the triple beam laser light, and this was a little starship laser light. And basically they were a very simple little toy. You push buttons and it would pop open, and then it does a little light show. You have to really be in a dark room to really be able to see it, but it has a little light that bounces around. Air bazooka and the power bazooka. And then there was another product called heli shots. In fact, this is the only one I have left, and there was a foam missile that went on here.
Of course, the military wasn't impressed, but every little tyke in the land could see for themselves that these were the coolest toys since the Frisbee. Brian's bank balance was getting back into the black. Everyone knows that the louder, the flashier, the more annoying a toy is to grown-ups, the more it'll appeal to kids. And Brian, still a kid at heart, knew it. Enter his pièce de résistance, the Light Chaser.
These are a couple samples of the Light Chaser, and it's basically became a huge hit in the Disney theme parks. That's where its big success came from, and they've got lots of different versions for Disney, and there's a lot of other generic versions of it. And it's amazing. This was probably a one afternoon project. Cost me about $5 of parts to build the original prototype, and now they make literally hundreds of different versions and styles, and it's just a wildly successful product. And I get emails from people all over the world. In fact, just recently got one from a man telling me that his son has Down syndrome, and when he heard I invented this, he wanted to tell me what this has meant to him. But it's just a simple little item, and yet, for some reason, it's just become a huge, huge hit. So that pretty much funds my project.
And the Light Chaser changed Brian Walker's life. Now a multi-millionaire, money worries don't keep him awake at night. But his next project, which puts him on top of a rocket hurtling into space, might just make up for it. Few people have the desire to hurtle against the odds into space. Even fewer have a fortune or the guts big enough to build and man their very own spaceship. But so far, over 6 years, Brian Walker's Light Chaser royalties have provided $500,000 to build this oversized flying cigar tube, or as he calls it, the ultimate erection.
This is my test rocket here. This is the one I'm going to be launching to 15,000 feet in, and I'll skydive from it, and the rocket will come down under its own parachute. But I'm using a catapult-assisted launch to where the rocket is actually boosted into the air using air pressure instead of relying on its own fuel source for the entire flight.
I'd like to get Viagra to sponsor me on this. That's why I've got Viagra on here. They're not a sponsor as of yet, but I put it on there because I'm going to do some publicity shots and send it to them. If I get up in this thing soon enough, it'll be the first time a private citizen has gone up in a private rocket. Even though I'm only going 15,000 feet, there's never been a private vertical rocket launch with a person on board that wasn't done by the Russians or the Americans.
Brian's confidence has to be admired. Blast off in something that sounds like a big bicycle pump, then parachute out through this sort of cat door at 15,000 feet. But is this really as simple as it sounds? Well, it's not a moonshot. It's half the height of regular airline travel. A little extreme for skydiving, but Brian won't face oxygen starvation. Not this time. But this is just the start. If he survives this mission, Project Rush, wrap it up super high, will set its sights a little higher. The full-sized rocket shown here will go 50 miles up into the blue yonder. NASA, eat your heart out. The boy from Bend is getting set to give you a run for your money. Yet even Steve Bennett, whose aerospace company is a contender for the $10 million X Prize to be the first civilian group to put a man into space, thinks that Brian should think twice about his standalone mission.
Just about every aspect of his vehicle and the design and the way he's wanting to do it is kind of wrong, or it could certainly use improvement. You know, he really does need a bit of help. So if he continues on the course that he's set himself, he's going to end up in a wooden box. I don't want to see that happen, but, you know, that's up to him.
Naysayers be damned. Mr. Walker is deadly serious. He signed up at Russian space school for would-be astronauts, and he shot this home video to prove it. Now he's set for a gut-wrenching warm-up in a MiG fighter jet, just to get the feel. It's a boyhood dream come true.
Ever since the beginning of the space program, when I was just young, 5 or 6 years old, my earliest memories are of the beginning space program, and I wanted to be an astronaut like most kids in those days, but By the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I just kind of had a feeling I wasn't cut out for the normal right stuff, if you will, and always thought that someday I'd grow up, build my own spaceship. This is how you get into the suit. This is just an airtight bag. And believe it or not, it's kind of like a bread sack. I'm gonna wear Depends. They'd be another great sponsor. I'm gonna go up in this test rocket. The idea is to go straight up 15,000 feet, and then I'll bail out and I'll do a regular skydive. And this opens up a potential for what I call rocket skydiving, which would be a new way of skydiving where you'd set up literally drop zones that didn't use airplanes, but people would be shot up on catapult launch rockets that would take them to jump altitude in a minute as opposed to 15 minutes. One must always learn, I gotta pop my ears, to release the pressure before you open your face mask or you'll blow your eardrums.
It's important little tricks like that Brian has come to space school to learn. That, and also to find out whether he has the right stuff. Zero Gravity Training 101, it has to be admitted, is a bit of a challenge, particularly the losing your lunch part. Undaunted, Brian went on to his graduation test. Not for the faint-hearted, this whirligig is a Russian centrifuge that lets him feel what it'll be like overcoming the Earth's pull when he finally rockets skyward.
I did training in Russia in the centrifuge, and the doctor that monitored my life signs said that if I had actually been training for a Soyuz launch, they would have certified me for a Soyuz launch. So I built my own centrifuge here so I could get used to the G-forces I'm going to encounter and know that I can operate any of the emergency things that I might need to.
So now, Brian's the only guy around with his own private centrifuge.
This is the business end that powers it. This is just a little ultralight engine, and when this thing's spinning, the propeller produces thrust, and that causes this whole thing to spin. The kill switch and throttle are radio control, so I can control it from the cockpit or someone can control it from the outside. And if you push it around here,
Who would have thought you could have such fun with little more than an old mower engine and an oversized weather vane? Mind you, fun is maybe not quite the right word.
Eight Gs is a lot of Gs. When you're at 8 Gs, you've got to fight to keep your throat open because it wants to flatten. And you don't have any muscles to reopen it if it does flatten. So, 8 Gs is 8 times your normal body weight. You can't even lift your arm. Whoa, that was quite an experience. It's all carbon fiber and epoxy, so it's very lightweight and very strong. And since I don't have to deal with re-entry heat, that's one question people have is like, well, coming back, why aren't you going to get hot from re-entry? No, because I won't be traveling orbital velocity. A returning space shuttle or a returning spacecraft has been traveling 17,500 miles an hour as it orbits the Earth, and it relies solely on atmospheric friction to slow down. So the heat generated by that friction is what causes such crucial problems. I don't have to deal with any of that, so this thing does not have to be able to withstand that kind of heat. The rocket itself is a very simple rocket. It uses a monopropellant, hydrogen peroxide. Basically, most rockets use a bipropellant, and you mix the two in a chamber and you ignite it, and there's lots of fire and flame, and it's quite tricky. That's why I chose this particular fuel. It really is the safest means that I can use.
And as if blasting skyward wasn't a scary enough proposition by itself, Brian is practicing his jumps and calmly looking forward to an additional adrenaline rush, realizing Isaac Newton's best remembered law: what goes up must come down.
Well, my ultimate goal is to just basically fulfill a dream I've had since a child and do something that's considered by most people to be either undoable or just totally extraordinary. I get emails from people all over the place, and most of them, 99% of them, are people saying how when they look at my website and they read my story and they see how many times I failed and now I'm going after such a large dream, that this is encouraging to them. And I mean, I've had some emails that have moved me to tears. I got one from a guy that was dying of a terminal illness, and he had a dream the night before he heard my interview on a radio program. He had a dream about being in space, and he said, I won't be there when you launch, but I'll be there in spirit. So that's been an added bonus I never expected.
Meanwhile, at Cape Canaveral West, bits of the super rocket lie in wait to be assembled on the launch pad. But before that day, we need to witness a successful test run and hear the fateful words as we all look skywards, "We have liftoff. Rocket Guy is on his way."
It's landed. Ideal's new astrobase has just landed. Look, the space lock is opening. And here comes the astronaut.
It seems there's a void now. It seems everyone's focused attention on athletes and movie stars and people that live in La La Land. And the kind of feedback I get from people is that there's a real hunger out there to see people doing things independently that are just big. I think there's a real need out there for people to see the kind of progressive steps that were more obvious, let's say, during the early days of the space program, and have just some real hope attached to it. So, if anything, if I can be thought of as a kind of person that encourages others through his own actions to go after their dreams, to not allow the naysayers and the pessimistic types to drag them down, that you can do almost anything if you put your mind to it, that's the way I'd like to be remembered. Who knows, there may be some kid that gets so enthused about what I'm doing that 10 years or 20 years from now he goes on to cure cancer. And they may ask him, what was your motive for doing this? And he'll say, well, when I was a kid, this guy, he built his own rocket and shot himself into space. And that was so encouraging to me that I figured I'm going to go out and do something big.
Rocket guy, high above the earth. Rocket guy, he's our captain. Rocket guy.
As far as humans are concerned, there are two problems with sharks. First of all, they're unpredictable, and secondly, they eat things as big as us every day. So what if you had a device that could bug sharks enough they'd want to stay out of our way? That's exactly what Mike Wescombe Down did, based on an idea that had been percolating in his mind for years. Raised in South Australia, Mike is well acquainted with sharks. In his younger days, many divers considered sharks public enemy number one, and for good reason. They occasionally killed people, including one of Mike's friends. So Mike set about developing a little gizmo that straps onto a human leg and is to sharks what DEET is to mosquitoes. It now sells worldwide, but the development of his shark stopper has quite a history. In the 60s, long before holes in the ozone ended Australia's Bondi Beach lifestyle, sport diving was all the rage, thanks to a Yank TV show called Sea Hunt.
Sea Hunt was the absolutely compulsory viewing. You came in and watched that, and every week was a fantastic episode in fantasy, from fighting sharks to getting treasure. It built up this image in young boys' minds that they all wanted to emulate this character, and so it took off as a sport. Unfortunately, the byproduct of that was we also wanted to hunt things, and so hunting was spearfishing, and then spearfishing developed into quite big competitions where, when you think about it nowadays, it was just disgusting. And at the end of the day, there'd be a pile of fish on the beach that was so big that it had to be buried, by a tractor. On one of those spearfishing days at one of our beaches, there was a shark hanging around. I saw it at one stage and it just looked like a railway carriage underwater. It was pretty big. Then there was a tremendous commotion when I came out of the water. They dragged up a surf ski, and on the surf ski was the remains of a friend of mine, same age, and he'd been torn in halves by a great white, and of course he pretty well died within seconds. It was just a shock, a tremendous shock to see someone wiped out like that. And we all hated sharks. Everyone hated them. I mean, every possible device that you can imagine was designed. Some of them were quite ingenious. Some of them had a little spear tip, like a hypodermic needle. And when it hit the shark, it would jet compressed air inside it, and the shark would float to the surface and couldn't hurt anyone. There were amazing efforts made to get sharks out of the way.
Yet even then, this underwater blood sport had Mike thinking there had to be a better way. A way to protect humans from sharks.
In the 70s, I was messing around with electronics, and I actually had this idea that there must be some way of repelling sharks. We were unsuccessful in coming up with a solution, but we wanted to come up with something so that we could swim around with this magic device that would keep them away.
However, the magical shark-stopping device that Mike was looking for would still be several years away. A South African group was the first to find that sharks didn't like being zapped with electrical energy. I mean, who does? Their device bugged the shark's sensory system, tiny organs that cover the animal's snout that work like radar, pinpointing possible meals, including, of course, humans. Here at last was something that could hold the shark at bay. The shark pod used a low-frequency current that created a kind of shield, keeping sharks at least 5 meters away. But the system was too big and had a lot of problems, including faulty cables and batteries. Throughout 2001, Mike found himself repairing shark pods until he decided to build a device of his own.
It was like being handed an opportunity on a plate. If you can come up with something and if you can work with them, maybe we'll get this right.
Wait. Go.
Now, with a new, more powerful compact zapper, renamed the Shark Shield, the fun of field testing begins. Of course, it's hard to get volunteers for this job, so initially, a piece of foam takes the place of a willing human.
When we go testing, we prepare out of heavy foam a particular shape that we agree on. Now, we've had surfboard shapes, we've had seal shapes, and on those we mount a fake unit with a fake set of electrodes. Everything is identical to the real unit, so that you couldn't scientifically say, well, of course the shark could see something different on that one, that's why it kept away.
And just to make things extra tough on the Shark Shield, bloody bait is dipped into the water to get the sharks worked up. A shark feeding situation like this is what most divers would prefer to avoid. For 10 minutes, a float with the fake unit is trailed behind the boat and is constantly targeted by the shark. But when the float is changed for an identical one with the Shark Shield switched on, the difference in behavior is immediately obvious.
And during that time, the shark behavior changes from these incredible short attack runs. It usually reverts to a circular tracking behavior where it runs round the float and down the float, comes up under the float. It actually is quite intriguing watching them attempt to break through the field. We then give that 10 minutes and then change it over for the passive unit, and the behavior is instantly back to aggressive, full-on attack.
Peter Clarkson, a professional diver who knows these Western Australian waters well, owes his life to the Shark Shield.
I was diving off Kalbarri, which is 600 kilometres north of Perth. I was looking for seashells, which is a passion of mine. I was on my way back up to the surface when I just realised that I was not alone there anymore. I had company. You know, we had been diving with whales for about a week prior to that. Every single day we would see minke whales swimming around us. So I just assumed that the creature that was next to me was another minke whale. But its profile was entirely different. It was vertical in the water, following me up from the bottom. And immediately I realised it was a shark. That was no whale. It was big enough to look like a small whale, but it was a great white shark. Yeah, it never came closer than about 5 meters. It would turn towards me, but then it would just stop, as if there was something keeping it away. Turn away, swim out to the limit of visibility, about 20 meters, then swim back in. It did that many, many times during my decompression. Yeah, my heart was pounding, and I was certainly hoping that system worked. I guess that the Shark Shield had its effect, for sure. I felt very, very relieved. I didn't feel safe, but I felt relieved.
Peace of mind in the shark soup off Australia's beaches isn't easy to come by, even though they say you've more chance of being killed driving to the beach than by a shark. Mind you, if you're a surfer with an unfortunate likeness to a seal, the great white's favorite tea time snack, you're still relatively easy meat.
The surfer normally wears a leg rope so that they don't lose the board. What we've done is we've incorporated as part of that leash with our electrodes inbuilt, and so the whole thing is just sitting on their leg and trailing off just as a leg rope normally does. The whole time that antenna's in the water, it's pumping a signal into the water. So the very vulnerable times for most surfers tend to be in the slack water time when they're resting and waiting. And of course, we all know that the best spots are where the fish channels are or where there are seal colonies. And these, of course, are the shark zones.
Before I had the shark shield, I was very nervous out in the water. Sometimes I'd last 20 minutes and it'd become overcast and murky and I'd get quite frightened, and surfing by myself quite often I'd come in, but now I have the shark shield. The mindset is completely different. I don't even remotely think about sharks anymore.
The way I see this unit is, with hundreds of these, every one we sell goes in the water is potentially saving not only a human being, but it's also possibly saving a shark, so that makes it worthwhile.
No matter how good the technology, it can't do its job unless people follow the user manual.
The usual procedure is that we always switch these on as soon as we hit the water and leave them on until the last second when we get out.
It seems obvious, but for the shark shield to work, you have to have it switched on the moment you hit the water. It establishes an irritating barrier around the diver, keeping sharks at bay. Once a hungry shark is worked up, no amount of electricity will stop it. Unfortunately, some people haven't taken this advice, like a scallop diver in Southwest Australia.
He was taken by a huge white pointer on the surface of the water. They chose not to switch it on. That was normal procedure, and we've had that problem with abalone divers too. The shark attacked him on the surface, and it was all too late to do anything about it. So it did cause us incredible damage. I suppose you could say the sails just fell away. Everyone naturally assumed that it hadn't worked. But we've learned a lot, and we've made sure that the bulletins have gone out explaining that you must set up the field in the water. That deterrent field is very important. It's no use switching it on once the shark's right in close.
But used correctly, these devices do work. In this test, a whole tuna was put out, protected by the electrical field. This diver had enough faith in the device to leave his protective cage and sit under the bait, while this huge great white kept a safe distance. While some promising developments are on the horizon, like this new streamlined military model, shark shields are not exactly jumping off the shelves. While about 3,000 units have sold worldwide, it seems a lot of dive shops are nervous about mentioning the word shark.
I guess I'd have to say that I was quite surprised that not everyone embraces the concept of this device the way I do. I've always wanted this to be a product that will help people enjoy sport in the water and stop the hatred and the prejudice against sharks.
For more than 20 years, Todd Mackover has been taking the whistle-a-happy tune idea of music and giving it a little oomph. It's part of a dream he has to try to get more kids to realize that music isn't stuffy, it's fun.
My big dream was to have children think of themselves as musicians and especially think of themselves as being able to make their own music.
The Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston is a prestigious think tank where big business comes for new ideas. Recently, toy makers have been beating a path to Todd's door at MIT. He's head of the music arm of the Media Lab. His new inventions have the manufacturers very excited. What Todd and his team of students have come up with might soon be hitting the toy store shelves. And more importantly, will give kids the opportunity to get involved in making their own incredible music. Todd turns dreams into musical machinery. He's got all sorts of weird digital musical inventions, guaranteed to blow your mind. And some, like the hyper instruments, have hit the big time with Peter Gabriel and Prince. He's even fixed up a digital cello for Yo-Yo Ma. Reading changes in the artist's fingers, signal processing measures and interprets human expression and feeling, enhancing the sound.
My idea was to take instruments that existed, to have technology built into them that would measure what someone like Yo-Yo Ma or Prince or Peter Gabriel was doing, and use that information to greatly expand what they could do with their instrument.
It was always in Todd's stars, or at least his genes, that he would end up fusing the science of computers and the art of music. His dad was an early computer whiz. Mom, a Juilliard-trained pianist.
So besides teaching us piano, she also really wanted to teach us to think creatively about music. She used to do things like have a few children in the neighborhood get together for a class, and she'd give us 10 minutes, for instance, to go around the house, and each of us would have to find an object in the house that made a sound that we liked. Then we'd see how many different sounds you could make with each object. Then you start to think about, okay, well, what does that feel like? What does it suggest, and what would happen if we put this sound with that sound? And little by little, we'd be making pieces with these objects we just found around the house.
I had a traditional training, but only one teacher asked me to make my own music. And I vowed that I would make sure that if I ever had children, I would ask them that question very early on. Todd asked questions that haven't been asked before also, so I guess that was part of what we passed on. A curiosity about what possibilities are, and a passion for doing it.
Like his mother, Todd studied music at Juilliard and was soon dreaming of creating music with computers. But in the late 70s, the technology was almost medieval. Turning a musical fantasy into digital reality was hard.
And I was very attracted to digital computers, even though it was the worst possible interface then. I used to go down and write Fortran programs on punch cards, and a week later this guy would come in with a little reel-to-reel tape, and I'd hear the 30 seconds or so of music that I'd made. And it was incredibly primitive, but at that time it did help me to hear the sounds that I was imagining.
Still working in the dark ages of digital music, Todd landed the top job in music research at the Paris Pompidou Center in 1978. The center's mandate was to make art and culture accessible to the man in the street. And as far as music was concerned, in Todd Mackover, they couldn't have found a better guy.
Since I had this bug to take the music in my head and make it happen through machines, but I also really believe that music is something human and personal and gestural. I'm a performer. I really dreamt of a computer, not with punch cards, but something that I could grab and twist and pull with my hands and use with my body. And at IRCAM, there was an Italian scientist, a nuclear physicist named Giuseppe Di Giugno, who was just making the first computer made specially for music. The first one that you could actually program, push a button, and you wouldn't have to wait a week, but the music would come out right away. And immediately I sort of saw my destiny, because this was the kind of machine that I knew you could learn to treat not only like an instrument, but like a new kind of instrument.
To purists of Beethoven and his ilk, this was heady stuff, odd even. And so for the last 17 years, Todd has found a home for his alternative ideas at MIT Media Lab.
I loved the idea of instruments that were tactile, that you could squeeze and touch, that weren't at all like normal computer devices. They weren't plastic. So we started thinking about things that were rubber and textile and squishy and squeezy. So we decided to make a jacket that was like a keypad. It was incredibly interesting. You played this thing by touching the lapel, And we originally thought about it as being something on the sleeve. Then we thought something on the lapel made it incredibly social because people could see it, you could play notes on it, but you could also start a rhythm pattern, doom, 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 and then add in sounds depending on which key you hit, how hard you hit it, make incredibly complicated patterns. There was a tempo knob so you could like that.
Around the same time, Todd and his MIT team created this musical sensor chair, a strange digital device that seems to have a life of its own. The operator's derriere completes the electrical circuit. Then hands and feet control antennae and floor buttons which activate synthesized sound. Magicians Penn and Teller toured America with the chair in the mid-1990s. Currently at the Media Lab, these grad students are working on Todd's pet project, the Toy Symphony. A chance to let the world see and hear what high-tech toys can do. Using spanking new digital technology, the Toy Symphony's aim is to bring kids into the wonderful world of making music, without having to struggle with the nasty old-fashioned pain of actually having to learn to play, say, a piano or a violin. Perish the thought. Beat bugs are like mosquito stings. They make your fingers itch to want to try one. And of course, they're sure to fly off the shelves of the toy stores. And it's precisely because they attract every kid on the block, Todd has put these perky digital doodahs at the heart of his Toy Symphony.
One application here allows you to enter a very simple beat, and the beat that I will enter will be sent to someone else. And this person can develop my pattern, can add his own little tweak voice into my voice, so a collaborative composition can occur. So it goes something like this. I enter a motif or a pattern, rhythmic. And the same motif is being sent to Rob, and he can change it. And when he's ready, he can send it to someone else.
Beat bugs are the ultimate group instrument. Each person gets to whack the bug, change the sound, then pass it on to their buddy to twist and shape. And used in a large group, the bugs get kids working on the same musical team.
In general, I've always thought of the project as being designed especially for kids who probably wouldn't normally have had the opportunity to take music lessons, wouldn't have thought that music was something that they were supposed to do, wouldn't necessarily have music in their schools. It definitely feels like the kids get hooked, they get excited, they feel like they've accomplished something they never would have thought of accomplishing, and that somehow music will be a different part of their lives than it would have been otherwise.
Enter the music shapers. Remember those squishy toys Todd was developing? Well, the touch-sensitive beanbags are now ready for action. Hooked up to digitized computer sounds, they add another layer to the symphony. While the technology seems ready, the success of the project now rests with Todd and the children of the Toy Symphony. Toy Symphony goes further than simply getting musically untrained kids to tap out or squeeze weird digital toys for the fun of it. Another of Todd's concepts, the Hyperscore, allows these budding Mozarts to write their own compositions and then, to top off an experience we'd all have loved, perform their magical musical creations with a full-blown symphony orchestra. It's an easy way to write music. Its co-creator, Mary Farbood, shows just how simple the system is, changing the tones instantly by stretching and shaping the musical lines.
Yeah, it's very cool, actually. The program is designed so that kids can jump right into it and start composing something immediately. So you can increase and decrease the size of the notes, create your own tune. And I can shape the harmony by shaping this line in the middle.
At the heart of every great performance is the music itself. And here, Todd has assembled local school children to work on creating the hyperscore compositions. Only 4 or 5 of the kids' pieces will be selected for the Toy Symphony. The hyperscore program may look as baffling as a normal musical score, but it's actually fun. It's intuitive and kid-friendly.
Like a surprise, like
The finalists are announced at a public workshop.
I like this one a lot. I want to ask you, what's your... This is Sonia. Tell your whole name.
I'm Sonia Sanford, and my piece is called The Happy Cheese.
It's called The Happy Cheese. In the future, I think that to make the next generation of music, we need composers to work with scientists, we need new instruments, we need new materials, we need new orchestras. So we have to reinvent the whole reason that music exists.
As the dress rehearsal begins and everything is coming to a head, Todd's enthusiasm, or is that worry, is contagious.
It's tempting. Come on, let's go nuts. Rah! Rah! Oh, come on. There's nothing out of her monitor. It's over here.
Knowing it's only hours away from opening night, Todd is anxious that this test in democratizing music succeeds. The Toy Symphony shows how music can be accessible to kids of all economic backgrounds.
Yes, that's much better, you guys. The more, that's fantastic. Even more, this place is huge. There are going to be 2,000 people here. You got to go nuts.
5 years ago, even, I wouldn't have thought of doing a project specifically for children.
That was great.
And I wouldn't have thought of making these music instruments for kids. But I started remembering all this incredible training that I had as a kid and the finding the objects. There's no question that I looked for that for my daughters and realized that, oh gee, I was really lucky because there really isn't any training like that out there.
The big day has arrived. The Toy Symphony, featuring the kids' musical compositions, will be presented to the public at the newly constructed Winter Garden, a stone's throw from Ground Zero. And thanks to Todd and the Media Lab's innovation and enthusiasm, the featured score, designed by local school children, will even give Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and the professionals something to think about.
Every place we've been, I'm constantly amazed at how quickly the children catch on to doing remarkable things. The pieces that were played were of an incredibly high level for 8, 9, 10-year-olds who'd never written a piece of music before.
Finally, Todd had a chance to hear his Toy Symphony composition performed with the orchestra, hyper violin, digital toys, and the children's chorus.
So I think fundamentally through Toy Symphony and through these instruments and through hyperscore, probably my deepest desire is to democratize music in, I think, the most positive sense. Because what you don't want to do is take the Beethovens and, Paul McCartney's, whatever, the great musicians, and bring down the level so everything is kind of elevator music. What you do want to do is give people the tools to use natural skills they already have to make the learning curve as quick as possible, to get into the middle of something which is creative and exciting and interesting. And I think that'll make for a much richer musical life, and because music is a metaphor and a training for our real life, I think a much richer life for all of us.